Hi, I'm Richard Horton, and this is my final presentation for Modern Political Theory class. I wrote my paper on the United States as a disciplinary society in a modern panopticon, and this was based on our lessons from week 6, I believe. Our page limit made the paper fairly long, and I tend to make these presentations longer than I should because I get to talking a lot. So I'm just going to touch base on some of the main ideas to try to keep it around 10 minutes in length. So I did my paper on the United States as a disciplinary society, and it's based on our readings from week 6, in which a panopticon is also discussed and used as a metaphor for um, surveillance and observation in our society. So I began my paper with a little story, which a few friends and I were at a friend's house not long ago, and he was showing us his new media box that he had connected to his TV in his living room, and he could use it to stream different things, movies and television shows and stuff like that. And it basically worked by getting streaming downloadable files on the internet without having to actually download them. And so you could watch all this material, almost anything you can think of for free. But also on it, it had an option where you could select a country, select a city, and select a camera in that city, and you could watch cameras that were placed in the cities, whether they're traffic cameras, whatever, in real time, which was really interesting. And you could just see people walking back and forth and cars driving around, and they had no idea. And it just kind of got me thinking about our society and modern technology and how it kind of plays into our readings from week 6. So I want to start by talking about the concept of a panopticon. So a panopticon is an idea for a method of observation in a controlled institution. So Jeremy Bentham, the founder of utilitarianism, actually got the idea from his brother, who's I think his name was Samuel, if I remember reading that right. He had used the design while running a group of factory workers or something along those lines, but Jeremy Bentham thought it would be he basically took the idea and put a little finesse on it and designed a prison, what he thought would be a really good prison system. And also, it could apply to other types of institutions that have to do with discipline and control. One of the readings one of the sources I used for my paper talked about hospitals and schools and things like that. But basically, you can see in the picture that it's got it's just a big circle where all the prison cells are visible, and in the middle you have a tower that has 360-degree visibility within the cells. And Jeremy Bentham's original idea, from what I read, had bright light shining from the tower into the cells so that the prisoners could not see whether they were being watched, but the guards could watch them at any time, which kind of plays into the whole point, which is that the prisoners feel as if they're being watched all the time, which should affect their behavior in a positive way. So this picture is one of the most iconic panopticons ever built. It's called the Presidio Modelo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's in Cuba, and I thought it was really cool to find out that Fidel Castro was actually once imprisoned here, who just passed away recently. But now it's just an abandoned prison. But I wanted to talk about Jeremy Bentham also, just a few notes on him, mostly because I found him pretty interesting. He lived from 1748 to 1832 in England. He had some pretty radical ideas, many of which, if you read about them, are still controversial and debated about today. And so he helped found modern utilitarianism, as I mentioned before. And I found his death to be a pretty fascinating story, or after his death, rather. Uh, so this is a quote from Britannica.com, and it says, after Bentham's death, in accordance with his directions, his body was dissected in the presence of his friends. The skeleton was then reconstructed, supplied with a wax head to replace the original, which had been mummified, dressed in Bentham's own clothes, and set upright in a glass-fronted case. Both this effigy and the head are preserved in University College, London. So I haven't spent too much time looking into it, but I do know, I don't know what his reasoning was for this. Um, his wishes with what to do with his body. It's just I thought it was kind of strange. And I also thought it was really ironic that he has a quote unquote panopticam on his body, which is a camera that films onlookers and passersby from within the display. And I think it has something to do with a research project at the university or something. But yeah, I found that to be pretty ironic considering what we're talking about right now. Hopefully, I don't butcher his name. But in our week 6 work, we focused on Michel Foucault and some of his writing in Discipline and Punish, in which he used the idea of a panopticon to create a metaphor for modern society. So we can see how he might have reached these conclusions based on modern technology and the U.S. as a quote-unquote police state. Foucault maintained that a disciplinary society was one that was controlled by the governing body uh, by a number of methods, including observation, which is mostly what we're talking about now. So the U.S. has a panopticon, metaphorically speaking. In the U.S., we have an exceptional amount of observation, and over the last few decades, it has only increased exponentially, really. This amount of surveillance is meant to keep people from doing wrong, much like the original panopticon. It was meant to, when people feel like they're being watched, they don't do things that they know they shouldn't. And that's the same idea for cameras. That's why stores like Walmart have cameras. That's why banks have cameras, because it's meant to keep people from doing wrong because they're being observed. But it's also meant to make it easier to bring wrongdoers to justice by capturing them on camera. But much of the more recent changes in regards to surveillance in the United States have come in the wake of 9/11. So the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Centers left the nation scarred, and it was a surprise and a horror, and the nation immediately wanted justice for those responsible. And most people tend to remember exactly where they were when it happened because it was one of those things. It was a big deal. The Bush administration jumped into action immediately with a number of answers and reforms that have helped build the disciplinary society in which we now live today. One of those was the Patriot Act, one of the early reactions to 9/11. If I remember correctly, I think I read it was passed just 45 days after 9/11. But it allowed the FBI to dramatically increase its surveillance capabilities domestically without the need for a warrant, which a lot of critics consider a violation of Fourth Amendment rights. And it certainly seems that way when you read about it. But most people at the time probably thought it was necessary, and most people got behind President Bush after that catastrophe because it kind of brought the nation together, and I don't think a bill like that would be passed today, but it was at that time. So the Department of Homeland Security was another consequence of the attacks. Before 9/11, this department did not exist, and now it's the third largest department in the executive branch. So it was created by combining 22 agencies, and its primary responsibility is domestic security. So they deal with a lot of the surveillance and security for within the country. The TSA was also created after 9/11. Um, Many people loathe the TSA and probably dread encountering them when they travel via flight. You hear all kinds of horror stories in the news about searches and things gone awry, but the TSA has much less restrictions on their ability to search and seize compared to a normal police officer, and this is because it's claimed that extra precautions are necessary in places like airports and stuff for public safety. So as a disciplinary society, we have a pretty strong police force as well. However, many have argued that our police force has become too militarized, and in the last couple of years, police shootings have been scrutinized in the media, leading to public outcry and various social movements such as Black Lives Matter, which is often featured in the news today. So most of what we talked about with the Patriot Act, the TSA, Department of Homeland Security, those are all things that kind of infringe on citizens, and they affect citizens more directly, and they make citizens feel more watched, and like they don't really have very much privacy left. But now, um, you know, the police shootings have kind of led to what I think is a pretty interesting twist in a panopticon-like society. So many are now calling for police to wear body cameras so they can be held more accountable for their actions, and indeed some police forces around the nation have instituted such cameras. It's interesting to see the tables turn when it comes to control through observation. And in the picture, you can see a police officer um, showing off his body camera, which is, like I said, supposed to make it more accountable, supposed to make the police accountability more convenient, I guess. So, America in the future. Many people are not fond of these developments, but they are meant to protect United States citizens, and they probably aren't going to change anytime soon. Um, so, a disciplinary society can actually lend many benefits, including a reduction in crime and better behavior from citizens, and as we just talked about, government officials as well. However, it's important to remember our history and our rights, and to ensure that our panopticon does not get out of hand, as it can be both a blessing and a curse. So that's the end of my presentation. And in case you're wondering what the picture is, it's a mountain of cell phones, which is something I think is another development that's caused a lot of people to be observed oftentimes when they're unaware of it. But anyway, these are my sources, and thank you for watching.